What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have an album review for you, and one that I've been kind of eager to go over just because, I don't know, I kind of liked their last one, and I've been kind of getting into this style maybe a little bit more, even though it's kind of been a weird year for it, and I'll get into that. Today, I'm going to go over the latest offering from Ghostbath, Rose Thorn Necklace. This also comes out on the 9th of May on Nuclear Blast Records. This band formed in 2012 in North Dakota. This is their 5th album overall. I got into this band with their last album, Self-Loather, which the accuracy of that album title is astounding, because that was one of the most depressing, harrowing listens I think I'd had in a while. And depression is kind of their thing. This is described as depressive post-black metal, which I think is very accurate and probably pairs well with, I don't know, uncontrolled weeping. Now, as I said, it's been a weird year for me in terms of this style, in terms of just post-black metal in general. One of the albums that I was really looking forward to that I had high hopes for was the last Harakiri for the Sky, and I was immediately let down. And then the band that I usually kind of make fun of, with Death Heaven, put out the album of their career. So for me right now, the wires are kind of crossed, and I was kind of wondering what this album would do. And the only thing I really had to compare it to was their last album, which again was harrowing, depressive, very emotionally driven. And I would say that this is too, but this album is decidedly different. First off, at least in terms of the liner notes from the last one, I believe, was written entirely as a band, or at least it had other performers on it. This one, the main guy behind the band, Dennis McCullough, kind of took over everything. Well, mostly everything. He handles guitars, synths, pianos. I believe he also plays bass on here. And I would say he's probably the sole songwriter on here. At least according to the archives, this band still has an actual lineup, but I think this is one where he kind of took it upon himself to do everything outside of the drums, which he got noted session drummer Mike Heller, which, oh my God, that dude is an amazing drummer, and he adds so much awesome flair to the drum work on here. And because this seems like this was entirely written by Dennis, this has a very different feel in terms of comparing it to the last one. You still have the bright shimmering riffs contrasted with harrowing, gnarly vocals and blast beats and kind of that black metal coldness, but there's a lot more going on here. This is definitely still sad. It is very depressing. A lot of the melodies in here, while being very bright, are also, again, just very, I don't know, somber, dreary, a lot of forlorn, woeful sort of vibes that just kind of radiate off of this music. But in comparison to the last one, I feel like there's just way more to this one in terms of, dynamics and songwriting. I think the ebb and flow of this album just feels different. You have a lot of contrasting moments between these bright, layered guitars, which do get decidedly heavy at times. You have some good machine gun riffs that show up, songs like Dandelion Tea, Stamen and Pistol, and Well, I Tried Drowning, which, I don't know, is kind of an interesting song title. Feels like that's the opening line to a therapy session. So how was your day? Well, I tried drowning. Well, here's to you not being successful at that. But there's a lot more in the way of riff work, because one of my gripes about this sound is occasionally I feel like it gets a little too self-indulgent with the heavy strumming and lush atmosphere. It's a cool effect, but I feel like, these bands can kind of tend to drone on it, and that is kind of the post-rock element here, where you drone on melodies and continuously keep building on them. But I like the fact that this album is just packed with really interesting dynamics, even jarring at times, but I feel as though this album is a little bit more expressive outside of sadness. One thing that really struck me right away were the vocals. The vocals, I feel like they have more dynamic to them. It's not just the desperate pleading screams. In fact, within the blackened screams, you have moments where he sounds decidedly more sinister, and there are some seriously aggro moments on here where that really fits. But also shifting tracks even within a riff change to something more desperate and agonized. There is decidedly less weeping on here, which was kind of an issue I had with Self-Loather. I get it. This is sad. I can feel it. I didn't need the additional crying in there to really cement that. You do get the occasional gasps and wheezes and groans that, sound like a very emotional performance, to the point where he's just giving it his all behind the microphone, where it's a very cathartic experience, but it's not overdone. And then there are flat out death growls in here, which I think are really solid and add a different kind of aggression to it. But all of that works well with how these songs, kind of move around a lot. Lots of open, shimmering, beautiful, clean passages, bright synth work, which can give way to like big, heavy, just giant size riffs and melodies. I like the fact that this has like a bigger, broader scope. Like you can just hear it in the songwriting. Dandelion Tea in particular was one that I thought was a big standout. It kind of caught me off guard and had some outside the box, or at least outside the box of like post-black metal ideas. It comes in with these bright, shimmering melodies. It's like an isolated, clean guitar. It's a bit of a carryover from the instrumental that precedes it, Thinly Sliced Heart Muscle. That's an interesting title too. But as the song progresses, you get into like these more machine gun riffs, which I don't expect that necessarily from the style. Like, you know, it does show up. A lot of what I expect is, of course, like bright, shimmering tremolos, like a lot of ascending melodies, but this kind of gets like flat out riffy and chuggy. You get this really awesome groove pattern, and once again, Mike Heller's drum performance. I can pretty much give him the glope on almost like every like album he's appeared on. The dude is an amazing drummer. There's these really cool grooves that come in, like fun accents with the cymbals, and then it gets into this like heavy metal gallop and this like straightforward kind of just, you know, heavy metal riff. It's a very classic sounding gallop. The riff that carries it is solid. And then it breaks into the bridge with like heavier, darker, more sinister tremolos. I like the fact that, again, this will get a little bit angry, a little bit darker. This isn't, again, like so steeped in just like being sad. And the song is catchy as hell. Like some of the best melodies. And melody is definitely still like the biggest part of this, but I like the contrast and guitar play on here. Like there's a lot of stuff that even when it does get heavier and it kind of like changes tones a little bit, there's always something to kind of contrast it, whether it's a synth pattern or like a clean melody on top. Hell, even some of the leads that show up, which are, you know, very minimal, but I feel like they also have like a cool contrast to the overall sound because often they're very, how bluesy sounding. The end of Vodka Butterfly, there is this like fun little blues run. It's very short, but I feel like they just kind of like peppered in like, you know, a little bit of like David Gilmour towards the very atmospheric, lush end of that song. But that sort of contrast between melody and like the heavier, more harsh sections is all over this album. This album can be dense and heavy and occasionally like impenetrable in terms of like how like heavy it can get, and then be like light as a feather, very ethereal, almost kind of delicate in a way. Honestly, it kind of mirrors the whole album title here. This album kind of represents the thorns in the flower and the delicate petals. For me, that gives this album more depth, and I like, again, the fact that it steps outside the box. Like this feels more akin to like the last Deaf Heaven album, or even a band like White Ward, which, I mean, you can still call them post-black metal, but at this point, especially with that last album, which was brilliant, you could almost call them progressive. I don't know if I could flat out call this progressive, but it is very forward-thinking, especially in terms of like the songwriting on here. There's enough like dynamics and cool riff changes on here where it doesn't get bogged down by the things that I feel like the style can be bogged down on, particularly the heavy droning nature on here. Like this doesn't have like a tremendous amount of like static blast beats. The drum work in here is varied as hell. Again, Mike Heller, total beast. But the riff work in general too, also lots of variety in there, like lots of stylistic shifts, lots of layering, and really good interplay with the synths. The synths do a lot of interesting things in terms of like different soundscapes, different melodies. Sometimes they're a little bit more atonal and kind of, you know, a little off kilter, and sometimes they are just lush and beautiful. There are points on this album when they are at like peak melancholia where this feels very similar to like the first two Catatonia albums, Brave Murder Day and Dance of December Souls. You'd have to speed both of those albums up a little bit, I would definitely say, but the vibe is very similar in terms of like the layering of the guitars and the synths and, you know, again, very desperate anguish vocals, especially Dance of December Souls. Like that's kind of the main comparison, but there's a little bit of Brave Murder Day on there, especially when the vocals get a little bit lower and a little bit more like death metal oriented. I got that a lot on the last track, Throat Cancer, which is probably the most slow, most brooding track on here. You get these more downtrodden, clean guitars and this really interesting like delayed synth pattern on there. It kind of like dances along with the riff. But as the song goes on, it gets, you know, like more melancholic, more dreary. The vocals, I feel, in that song are particularly harrowing. There are points in there they sound outright painful, like there's some higher screams where it just sounds like he's just wrecking his vocal cords for the take. But it's the riff changes at the end. The riff changes at the end of the song are almost like a violent mood swing. It shifts again to those like heavy machine gun guitars. You get a really cool groove over it. It feels, again, much more angry and visceral. And then it takes a hard turn into like David Lynch, like the opening of Twin Peaks sort of vibe. You get those like deep, melancholic kind of, I don't know, like almost country-ish guitars. But even that section drops out towards the end. And you get this isolated, shimmering, beautiful guitar melody that has like echoes of like Cave In circa Jupiter. All this happens in a span of like kind of a short amount of time. And that's another thing with this album. It's a full 10 minutes shorter than the last one. And a lot of the songs I feel have been kind of shortened down and condensed, but effectively. The melodies hang on for the right amount of time. They're there long enough for them to like really soak in, and they don't needlessly draw out anything. And for me, coupled with, you know, the really cool dynamics on this album, that makes these songs a little bit more memorable. Vodka Butterfly, that one has electronic breakbeats in it, you know, just for a couple of moments on there, but it does kind of add this like interesting texture to it, like you're going from like, you know, blast beats and, you know, kind of a more aggressively sad song, like, I don't know, it's somewhere in between, to all of a sudden everything kind of dropping out and you're getting these like, you know, more muffled breakbeats. It even kind of starts off a little bit differently than most of the songs in here, where you get this muffled kind of drum beat, and then I don't know, I'm not entirely sure if it's guitars or synths or both, but it's very just kind of muffled. Then all of a sudden the song kind of explodes. I kind of ended up comparing it to like Pitch Shifter, but like emo Pitch Shifter. I don't know if that's the right comparison, but I definitely made it. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this album. In terms of any negatives on here, there are 3 instrumentals. I do think they are pretty good. I mean, the opening track, Grotesque Display, it does set up the atmosphere very well, and it is musical. It's not just a bunch of samples and soundscapes. Thinly Sliced Heart Muscle I thought was all right. It's, you know, kind of just like a transitional piece. You get, you know, guitars and synths. It's very spacey and also kind of warm too, which is not a descriptor I use for black metal very often. But it kind of just ends. Like, I feel like it just kind of cuts off as it's building. Now, granted, the melody to that song does carry over into Dandelion Tea in a way, like it's in a different key, I believe. But that was one of the few moments where I felt like there was a little bit of song left on the table. And then Needles is this very dreary piano sonnet, but it does have like an interesting appeal to it. Like you have rain in the background, and instead of like a straight up piano, there's this weird warbled effect on it. It's a little bit more unsettling, but it still has that very somber, reflective quality. And honestly, in terms of a song that just didn't grab me as much, it was honestly the title track. The title track I thought was good, but it didn't have the impact of other songs in here. In fact, I feel like this album really got going with Well, I Tried Drowning. The title track is kind of like a sandwich. It bookends the clean melodies. It has this very harsh but still very somber middle part to it. I still think it's good. It just doesn't have the impact, and it really doesn't have like all the clever dynamics that the rest of the album showcased. Outside of those minor complaints, honestly, I thought this was really, really good. Granted, I only had the last one to really compare this to, and that album is like a tidal wave of tears rolling over your body, but this has just a lot more to it. And overall, I'm going to give this 4 stars. I'm really hit or miss with this style of music. Like sometimes I think it's done really well. Again, White Ward, The Last Death Heaven. I like it when there's like more going on than just like the standard like droning tremolos and blast beats. Like I feel like there just needs to be more at times. I want the experience to be more than just cathartic or harrowing. I want like some actual cool dynamics in the style, because I feel like there's definitely room for it. And this band does it really well. The songs, I think, are cleverly written for the most part. Riff work in here, generally not something that I bring up with like more atmospheric bands, because, you know, it's more about the atmosphere than it is riffs, but there are solid killer riffs on here. And I think that works well with the fact that I think this album has more emotional depth than, well, at least the last one. It's more than just melancholic and sad. There are moments of just, you know, shimmering beauty on here. There's definitely some rage too. And it's very methodically paced, so each of these moments has like time to shine and really sink in. Even the instrumental tracks in here, they're not just like transitional tracks, they're actually musical. They do contribute something to the album. It doesn't feel like they're in there to pad out the length. They actually keep the album flowing really well. Generally, those little moments are kind of the things that I complain about, but I think they're really well done here. And again, the vocal dynamics in here. The fact that this isn't just pleading desperation and weeping, it gives this album, again, more depth. If you're a big fan of, again, I would say like the last Deaf Heaven album, probably New Bermuda too, and White Ward. Very similar to that, though, again, this is like condensed down a little bit more. Maybe a little bit more of like Cave-In's more atmospheric material too, but coupled with black metal. Check this out. This was a really solid listen. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you were new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships. They're only 99 cents, and our lone perk is doing a members-only live stream, which we will probably do after MDF when we're tired and busted and without money. Looking forward to running in some people there too. Again, if you see us at MDF, come up, say hi, shake hands. Let's talk metal for a bit. Anyway, membership is the main way to support the channel. We also still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our t-shirts and hats. That is linked down below. And there's also a join button down there too, if you would like to join up and chat with us in one of our goofy ass streams. The membership ones. The regular streams are pretty goofy too. And of course, thank you guys so much for liking, subscribing, following. Again, all this means the world to us. It's amazing seeing this channel grow. And yeah, we have a ton of content planned for you. Definitely going to keep up with the greatest hits thing. That seemed like something you guys really enjoyed. And of course, a lot of the usual stuff, reviews, collection updates, and yeah, maybe some fun discussions along the way too. Either way, we appreciate the hell out of you. So one more big thank you, because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.